This was requested by one of our therapists, and approximately at any given time, we have between 25 and 35 of our students are adopted. So it's a pretty significant population, a pretty significant percentage of the population that we serve that is dealing with these issues. And this is a fantastic book, one of the more recommended books on adoption for families that have that as part of their family constellation, family issues. And we like it because it doesn't necessarily pathologize like some of the other books do. Some of the other books look at adoption and adoption issues from a pathology focus, and this is a balance of strength-based and also some of the challenges that come with it. And I love the title because it's something that I think draws families into it, and parents can understand what the average child might want. So I'll talk about this book, and I'll go over the 20 things, and I'm also going to talk about attachment, and I'm going to talk about some issues around adoption in general. First of all, a lot of the adoption issues have to do with identity. I think we think of them sometimes as the trauma of being separated from a birth parent, but a lot of it's around identity, like who am I? And at an age when adolescents, young adults are trying to define who they are, it adds one more piece or one more missing piece perhaps to that puzzle. Right? It begins to be something of the unknown that they can't put their finger on, that they can't easily identify as part of themselves. So it's about identity. It also affects different developmental stages differently. Right? It affects the idea of intimacy differently, which is a later stage than identity development. The fears around intimacy, the fears of being abandoned. Even as you go into that stage of life where you're making children, for a lot of adopted children, having a child is so powerful, so profound, because it's the first person that for many of them that they end up relating to, knowing that is genetically related to them. And so that's a very powerful part for them to be working on. How do they make meaning out of the adoption? I think a lot of parents will respond to the adoption, well, it happened at birth, it happened immediately, it was planned. And so in their minds, there ought not to be issues surrounding adoption and attachment. But it's more than just the act. Even though they might not have conscious memory of it, the idea, the story that they have been adopted is still part of their story. You know, who am I? What did that mean? If I was less needy, less of a burden, for example, maybe my birth parents could have kept me. And again, all of these kinds of questions, it almost goes without saying, but I'm going to say it. All of these kinds of questions are very common and also have nothing to do with the adoptive parents. It doesn't take away, diminish, or erase any of that part of it, but those kinds of questions, dilemmas are still present. I noticed with myself, with treating children that were adopted, that there were kind of three stages that many of them went through. The first one was when I asked them about adoption and what it meant to them, how does it figure into the equation in their life at this point? Many of them would start off with, most of them would start off with, it has nothing to do with anything. It's not relevant in my life. It's not part of any equation, really. Then we would give them an assignment or a book to read. And then many of them would come back and say, it's everything. You know, this is the missing piece. This is the missing part of the equation. And then after time, they would begin to understand that it's something. It's a piece of the puzzle. Some larger, some smaller, depending upon the individual. But it's not everything, and it's not nothing. And so, as a therapist, when you're looking for trauma, pain, woundedness, when you're trying to make sense out of somebody's symptoms, you're looking under the usual places, you know, the usual suspects. You know where to fish. You know what rocks to look under, to lift up and look under. And so this is one of the areas that every therapist is going to explore, is going to ask questions about. Like I said, it's not about you, the parent. It's about them, their identity, who they are, how they make meaning out of it. And so beginning to talk about it, beginning to tell the story, beginning to write the story for the child is often an important part of what happens in therapy. We'll talk about attachment a little bit. Attachment is an emotional bond to another person. Psychologist John Bowlby was the first attachment theorist, describing attachment as a lasting psychological connectedness between human beings. And he talked about various characteristics of attachment. The first one he described as a safe haven. When the child feels threatened or afraid, he or she can return to the caregiver and receive comfort and soothing and support. That parent in a healthy attachment situation is a secure base. The caregiver provides a secure and dependable, consistent, reliable base for the child to explore the world. Proximity maintenance. The child strives to stay near the caregiver, thus keeping the child safe. And then separation distress. When separated from the caregiver, the child will become upset or distressed. So he started to describe what attachment is. And what I know about this is when a lot of people think about evoke therapy programs, wilderness therapy, or sending your child to treatment, I think sometimes people put too simple of a lens on it. Usually those people are treatment professionals in the home community. It ought to be considered. It ought to be discussed. It ought to inform you. But in the case of most of our clients, they're at a place where staying home and the risks are more dangerous or damaging. And attachment can build even outside of a presence during teenage life or adult life. If you can learn to see the other person, you can still do psychologically so many of these tasks, so many of these things that Bobby talked about, even if proximity-wise you're not in the same place, by the way that you respond, the way that you react. There are three or four types of kinds of attachments, qualities of attachment. I have 3 listed here. Secure attachment. Securely attached children exhibit minimal distress when separated from caregivers. Remember, these children feel secure and are able to depend on their adult caregivers. When the adult leaves, the child feels assured that the parent or caregiver will return. When frightened, securely attached children will seek comfort from caregivers. These children know their parent or caregiver will provide comfort and reassurance, so they are comfortable seeking them out in times of need. Most of the descriptions of this are related to pre-adolescence, but we can see some of the themes in later adolescence. And as children are trying to separate, individuate, develop their identity during adolescence, a lot of what we see is this kind of ineffective, non-elegant way of attaching and creating identity. Ambivalent attachment is described as children who are usually become distressed when a parent leaves. This attachment style is considered relatively uncommon, affecting an estimated 7 to 15% of U.S. children. Research suggests that ambivalent attachment is the result of poor maternal availability or primary caregiver ability, which is commonly, even in the research, still women. These children cannot depend upon their mother or caregiver to be there when they are in need. And then the last of the 3 that I've listed here is avoidant attachment. Children with avoidant attachment tend to avoid parents and caregivers. And I think all adolescents have some of this, right? Often have some of this. When offered a choice, these children will show no preference between a caregiver and a complete stranger. Research has suggested that this attachment style might be the result of abuse or neglectful caregivers. Children who are punished for relying on a caregiver will learn to avoid seeking out that caregiver. And sometimes that punishment can be subtle, right? The exhausted, exasperated, taxed parent with the sighs or the eye rolls, or saying things to a child like, "You're so needy," those kinds of things, those can fit under the small t trauma that can contribute to this kind of thing. In one book, they describe it as the shame of dependence that is common in many, many, many families. And this is described as, I feel ashamed if I need. I'm weak if I need. And there's something in our culture that does that almost across the board. And it comes up when I give this example. If I were to describe to you that my brother had a child, and I were describing this child to you as a good child, as a really good baby, you would know exactly what I meant in using the term good baby. I would describe somebody who's happy, somebody that is easily soothed, somebody that doesn't cry a lot, right? Somebody whose needs are easy to meet. So even from birth in our culture, we start to describe somebody as good who doesn't need. And the opposite is that if you need, you're a bad baby, you're a bad person. So while the examples that Bowlby describes here are a little bit more dramatic, we can see some of the subtle strains, if you will, in all of our culture around attachment issues. So the book that we're talking about tonight is 20 Things That Adopted Kids Wish Their Adopted Parents Knew. And they break up into 3 categories. The first one is communication issues related to the loss. And the first one that children that were adopted wish their adopted children knew is this: I suffered a profound loss before I was adopted. You are not responsible. Again, I cannot tell you how common it is for an adopted child, even though the parent has invited and encouraged discussion, exploration around this issue. Some don't, but the majority of them do encourage that kind of exploration. That the child, when we peel back a couple of layers, is afraid that exploration about adoption issues, which is exploration around the trauma or the birth parent or the identity, that the child is protecting the parent from their belief that it will be a betrayal. Number 2, I need to be taught that I have special needs, including emotional, educational, validation, parental, relational, and spiritual needs arising from adoption loss, of which I need not be ashamed. It's okay. And I think a lot of times parents want to come in and fix it and repair it. And if they can't fix it and repair it, then they feel guilty, like they overcompensate. And then you get really quickly into a dynamic where the child has to take care of the parent again. I have to be okay. I have to be happy. This wound has to be okay for my parent to feel good about themselves. And that's not the child's need. If I don't grieve my loss, my ability to receive love from you and others will be hindered. Eldridge warns that to go with your child to this place of grieving requires courage as well as a willingness to do your own emotional work. We can't take others where we haven't first been ourselves. Their pain will frighten us away. I think a lot of parents can relate to this idea, right? That the discomfort with a child's pain that triggers your own pain. I call it empathic misery. Right? Can we tolerate our child's struggle and grieving process? Can we help them, and can we, with them, lean into the pain and the work of grieving? Number 4, my unresolved grief may surface in anger toward you. This is a very, very common dynamic for children. And some of the ways that they lash out, while they seem so personal to the adoptive parent, that they're rooted in the original wound. I need your help in grieving my loss. Teach me how to get in touch with my feelings about adoption and then validate them. I mean, I think that one's true just about, I mean, the content is unique to the adopted child, but it's true really about all children, right? I need your help to learn how to feel. Teach me how to feel. And when they show up, hold them with compassion. And what that looks like is active listening, validation. Don't talk me out of it. Don't make me look on the bright side. Don't put a positive spin on it. I can do that work. I can get there myself. And to get there, I must travel through the pain, the sadness, and the grief. The second category is the birth family issue. Just because I don't talk about my birth family doesn't mean I don't think about them. It's so common, like I said, for adopted children to think about, have questions about, but then to for whatever reason, maybe because they don't want to feel pain themselves, they don't want to acknowledge it. It's a unimaginable issue to tackle, but also because their parents may be uncomfortable with it. But just because they're not talking about it doesn't mean. And like I said, when I shared with you the stages that a child goes through, the first stage is it doesn't matter at all. The second one is it's everything. And then the third one is it fits into my story. It's part of my story. Number 7, I want to take the initiative in talking about my birth family. It's okay to ask, say, be angry, to search. These questions haunt adoptees, and Eldridge tells us why. So it's okay, and I want to be the one that has some control over it, because adoption is not something that a child had control over in the first place. And like with a lot of trauma, taking back that control is part of the treatment, is part of the repair. Number 8, I need to know the truth about my conception, birth, and family history, no matter how painful the details may be. Regarding painful information about a child's past, Eldridge says, this giving of information doesn't have so much to do with the truth about his past as it does with his relationship with you and with himself. And again, I think a lot of parents want to protect. I would encourage you to get the support of a family therapist to navigate, to provide support for. I think, like with a lot of a grief work and a lot of trauma work, the problem is, and this one is probably amplified in this kind of a family, no two people in a family experience the same trauma. And so you don't have resources to support the person next to you all the time because you're having your own issues around it. So using a family therapist, or even, that's why we've been so effective in our program at helping children and families to work through it, because the child has support, they have resources. Number 9, I'm afraid I was given away by my birth mother because I was a bad baby. I need you to help me dump my toxic shame. And again, the dumping of toxic shame is not unique to adopted children, but it's specifically related to this content. And the way that we help them dump it is we hold on to their feelings. We're patient with them. We listen. We don't try to erase them or dismiss them or rationalize them out of them. Number 10, I'm afraid you will abandon me. I mean, that's a powerful one that I think really strikes at the heart for a lot of parents. And again, even if it was at birth, even if it was before any conscious memory, the story that they are told, the story that they've created, the story that they tell themselves around adoption can lead to this fear. Number 11, I may appear more whole than I actually am. I need your help to uncover parts of myself that I keep hidden so I can integrate all of these into the element of my identity. I think that's a really cool one, really cool idea, is that children of all kinds can appear more whole than they really are. And so, it's a classic phrase that children that come to our program are crying out for help. But there's a tremendous amount of truth to that idea. Right? That's what's happening in a lot of these stories. And they could never put words to it. But when our children become so symptomatic that they're functioning, that their safety, that their success is severely threatened, this is them saying, I need something more. And that's not to shame you, but they need more than you can give. Number 12, I need to gain a sense of personal power. That relates again to that thing that's common in trauma, that the one common thread is that the person didn't have choice over it. Number 13, please don't say I look or act just like you. I need you to acknowledge and celebrate our differences. Again, very dismissive, very erasing of the child's fear. And often that can come from a place of anxiety. And people that live together can start to have similar mannerisms. They can begin to look alike. But adopted children need to, at a core, be recognized for what they are, or who they are. Let me be my own person, but don't let me cut myself off from you. I think that's a pretty easy one for a lot of families. At least the second part is. I think the first part is hard for most families, especially when it comes along with unsafe behavior. But that's part of what they're trying to figure out, to work out. Please respect my privacy regarding my adoption. Don't tell other people without my consent. Again, going back to the choice. Having choice in this matter. Birthdays can be difficult. Holidays are what my therapist calls elevator days, right? That we can easily regress back to a more primitive state. The December holidays, Thanksgiving, New Year's, and birthdays for the adopted person are a celebration of something that was unwanted, right? That didn't fit in with somebody else's plan or needs. So it can easily be a trigger for them. Number 17, not knowing my full medical history can be distressing at times. I mean, that makes common sense, right? Number 18, I'm afraid I'll be too much for you to handle. And that's why a lot of people that suffer from attachment disorders do so much to try to make that come true, right? They push and alienate their parent. They push them away. They push every fulfilling prophecy of I deserve to be abandoned comes true. Number 19, when I act out of my fears in obnoxious ways, please hang on in there with me and respond wisely. Eldridge includes advice on how to confront obnoxious behavior. I think that's what we do at the program very, very much. That's what my book does. These webinars do. And people that need love the most are the hardest to give it to, right? We know that about people. So stick it out, be there and get support and get resources. And even Evoke itself is a way of hanging in there, of not giving up. Number 20, even if I decide to search for my birth family, I will always want you to be my parents. And again, if you are the parent of an adopted child, do you have that fear? Can you honestly look at that part and say that there is some threat there? I asked a parent who is an adoptive parent who works in my field. I asked him to share with me the things that he thought that he wanted other adoptive parents to know most. And this is what he shared with me. The most important, I believe, is this. When your child expresses anger toward you, the adoptive parent, the child is typically trying to deal with the hurt they feel toward their biological parent that abandoned them. That was said in one of the 20 things. Also, when the child is expressing anger and hurting you, the adoptive parent, he or she may be trying to connect with you in the only way he or she knows how to. For example, making you feel bad as the child. It is a primitive form of communication, right? That's what it's called, projective identification. I want you to feel what I'm feeling. And this is true of all parents, right? Ask yourself when you're having a powerful emotional response to anybody, and specifically to your child, especially if it's unique, right? If you have a certain kind of feeling around a person, often, or it's common, ask yourself, is this possibly how they're feeling? Powerless, hopeless, helpless, defeated. Lastly, my friend offered me this. Another major point is that many adoptive parents believe that loving the child with all your heart is enough to undo whatever problems the child might have. The fact is that love is not enough, that the issues the child has have their roots in the adoption itself, prior to the adoption itself, to the initial abandonment, and therefore have nothing to do with the adoptive parent. I was talking with a colleague, another friend of mine, who was saying that was the biggest betrayal for her, was that the social worker, when she adopted her child, that there was this implication that love will be enough, and love is not enough. Love is not enough with all of our children. You know, if we talk about love as an action, as a verb, then doing some of the courageous things that you're doing, that becomes enough, right? If love gets you into family therapy, if love gets you to do your own work, if love gets you to look at your part of the dance, your part of the equation, if love inspires you to get into this stuff, to watch these webinars, to do the parent workshop, to do your own personal work, then it is enough. But the feeling, the affection, the warmth that we feel for others, that has some value, but not enough to help others with what they truly need. All right, Andrew, I'm happy to take any questions that may have come in. Okay, I'm going to go. There's no questions that come in. I'll go to some of the announcements, and then I'll have another slide at the end so you can submit your questions to Andrea. We want all parents, while they're with us, to go to 6 12-step support groups: Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Nar-Anon, Alatinas for teenagers. Go to 6 of these meetings. Just try them out. If you haven't gone and you've either been in the program a while or graduated, please try them 6 times. They're fantastic resources. You can also go to NAMI.org, NAMI.org, to get resources, classes, and other support. Follow us on social media. This is very important because this can be more reliable than the emails for the announcements, for the parent meetings, for the webinars. Follow us on social media. The podcast, you can also watch all of these broadcasts, listen to all of these broadcasts. All webinar broadcasts now are also simulcast and produced about the day after on our Evoke Therapy Programs podcast or the SoundCloud app on an Android device. Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy, Facebook, Evoke Therapy Programs. The Second Nature Alumni Foundation is on Facebook. You can also go to our blog. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available in paperback. Also, audio versions are available on Amazon.com. You can go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page on Amazon through the Amazon Smiles account And it's the same cost. The books are the same price, but a percentage of the proceeds goes to the charity organization to help people that can't afford therapy. All right, upcoming parent support groups. It's going to be a busy month for me. I'm going to be on vacation next week, and then we have Orange County at the end of the month. New York is May 3rd. Toronto, I'll be in Toronto May 10th. Seattle May 17th. Chicago May 23rd, and then back in New York on the 7th. If you have any questions, email Andrea@evoketherapy.com, or if you want to RSVP. We want all families, all current families, to go to the workshops. The next one is May 27th at Entrada. If you want to do your own work and deeper, then April 28th is the next Finding You. Those are the psychodrama, art therapy, psychoeducation, small group, intensive therapy intensives that I do. And get on the April 28th one fast if you're interested, because it may close, it may fill up really quickly. To learn more about Finding You or Finding Family, you can go to our website or email intensives@evoketherapy.com. Private family intensive, custom intensives. You can also do a pursuits trip. This is a fun therapy light adventure course. You can also add a therapist to that. All right, any live questions? The first question: what differences, if any, with children that are adopted at birth or months or years later? That will be about the kind of care that they are provided for, right? It's really going to differ, because some situations, there's very little of the child's needs that get attended to, or that are unreliable. I was talking to somebody recently who visited an orphanage somewhere, and she was talking about how she'd visited many orphanages over the world, but in this one particular country, can't recall what it is right now, they were incredibly nurturing, incredibly present with the children. But that's not often the case. So, whether you go through foster homes and the trauma that can occur there, the earlier is typically better, because there's less of an opportunity for more trauma to be added onto it. So it's really about the kind of environment and what happened during that period that makes the biggest difference. My son was severely traumatized before and at birth. After 6 weeks in a NICU, he came home to a loving environment. It's hard to hear you say that the attachment issue stems from lack of parental responsiveness. Is that what you meant? That's really not what I'm saying. That's what the diagnostic manual says. But even in his story, the trauma is in his body. It's still there. And so it happened, like you said, at and right after. And all of us can do better as parents to create a healthier attachment. That's really what I'm talking about in all of my webinars and all of my work. My whole book, the whole idea is giving you a way to understand your child, to see your child, to respond to them. I think for parents at Evoke, and through the work that we do, we're really giving you tools, insight, resources to better respond and support your child. Sometimes the child is very different, and sometimes children are very different, and sometimes we don't have the model, the resources to respond. So yeah, there's the original trauma, there's the story that they tell, and then our part becomes, how can we respond to that? There's also genetics that come with adopted children that we know very little often or nothing about. And there are limitations that come with that genetic, right, that given, if you will. So, and how do we respond to that? So all of that becomes part of the equation. But there are issues in terms of the attachment that can be very similar in non-adopted children, right, adolescents. The adopted child has a story that's different. But the way to respond and support the adopted child and the average, the typical, or excuse me, forgive both those words, the birthed child to a family where they're birthed, they're very, very, very similar. All right, folks, I hope that was helpful. And for those of you who have this as a part of your family, I will say that this also becomes a great resource as it is treated. That adopted children know something about themselves that people that don't have to ask these questions don't. So like a lot of the issues that our children come with, what is their difficulty, their struggle, their liability, their weakness becomes their strength. And I've seen that over and over and over again. All right, the next webinar will be Thursday night, April 6th, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, and that will be on utilizing educational consultants. I hope these points of contact are helpful, and good luck in all of your work, and thanks for attending. Thank you on behalf of your child for doing your work. Have a great evening. I'll talk to you Thursday night. Bye-bye.